Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the AuctionChatter podcast and another AuctionChatter episode. We haven't done one of these in a while. And in this episode of AuctionChatter, I'm going to be joined once again by Moshe Maimon, and we'll be discussing the upcoming Kestenbaum and Company auction, Auction 112, rare Hebrew books from the library of the late Dr. Michael D. Paul. And that auction will take place Thursday, June 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. It's in Brooklyn, New York, but it'll be on BitSpirit, and there'll be a link in the show's notes. And this episode of AuctionChatter is sponsored by Kestenbaum and Company Auction House. And actually, I should just elaborate a little bit more on this. So this is a collection, rare Hebrew books, including 6 incunabula, which are Sfarim or books from the 1st century of print, so from the 15th century, from the collection of the late Dr. Michael D. Paul of St. John's, Newfoundland. And it contains a fine Isidore Kaufman portrait painting. There's one painting in here as well, but it's mainly old Sfarim. There's no, not really manuscripts or letters and that type of thing. So it's really a lot of beautiful classics. And as we'll get into, when a friend of mine who was perusing the catalogs, it was pretty amazing that this Dr. Paul was in Newfoundland, and he was collecting this really amazing collection of Judaica. And I would also be remiss if I didn't say thank you, Moshe, for joining me on the podcast once again.
Oh, pleasure to be here, Nachi. Wonderful. And yeah, it's been a little while, but good to be back. And like you were saying, I mean, a collection that's already been curated. We know already we're dealing with a very quality collection here. Everything here they're bound nicely, and we know the provenance of a lot of the items here. Besides the Incunabula, there's a lot of very exquisite items from the Val Madonna collection and an earlier famous collection. So the things here, all these items have already been selected. It's a very fine selection, a very fine swarm, a lot of classics here, which we'll cover briefly, and we'll get into some of the things that we haven't spoken about till now. Maybe we'll even chazer a few of the things that we have. We'll point out and highlight some of the interesting items here.
Yeah, we'll try, as always, to go through and highlight some things that we come across. Sometimes we mention every item, sometimes less. That's a large auction of 170 lots. So we're not going to mention every item. I'm not going to do that. Like I said, there'll be a link in the show notes so you can check it out. You can go to BitSpirit and check out the Kestenbaum auction. But we'll try to mention some of the things we'll just mention in passing. Some we'll spend some time on, and some we'll just, blurb. We'll mention a little bit.
And for someone who wants to follow along, it's this catalog is arranged alphabetically, so all the sfarim of any given mechaber, or sometimes it's a topic like Kabbalah under K, but they're all lumped together, so we don't have to. We'll talk about the mechaber and maybe mention just some of the titles here.
It's interesting that Kestenbaum does it. As an aside, when we start, it's nice this way where it's alphabetical, or sometimes K, it'll come up as Kabbalah, so it's there, and it's not only alphabetical as the author. We start off with Aboab, Shmuel, Aboab, Yitzchak, with the different farm, but it's nice, some sort of structure. Sometimes the catalogs, they try to structure it a certain way, like there's older farm, then you get the Chassidus and Kabbalah and letters, but it's a little messy, and sometimes you're not sure what's where. So here it's you can find everything, go in order. You want to find a specific item, you'll hear we talked about, a certain Machaber, Abarbanel, the Al-Sheikh, the Rabbi Yitzchak Rambam, those are all under alphabetical, starting by last name. It's pretty intuitive. Okay, so let's start. So there's a couple of classic items in the beginning where when we have a Dvar Shmuel or Shmuel Avu, we spoke about it a little bit, I think, in the past. Shmuel Avu of the Rav in Venice, and he writes Dvar Shmuel. This is famous. I think whenever it comes up on auction, it always talked about how there's a thing about Nathan of Gaza, Nason Azasi, he was there, Poshap Tzvi, and there's a thing about it, they made him Sonat Tacherim, there's a whole story, so that's included in Dvar Shmuel. I mean, it's also a famous Tshuva Sefer. This is a big Rav in Italy. He also wrote anonymously Sefer Tzarchonis, which he published in Prague. He wanted to be so anonymous, he published it out of the Center of Printing in Venice. Well, Venice wasn't as much at that time, but he published it in Prague, and he kind of decries on the social ills of his day, Stam Yenam, other issues that were going on in Italy, and he, perek by perek. So Dvar Shmuel is his chuvas, real classic chuvas. That's the first lot.
Part of, just to give you a sense of how important he was and what a famous Rav he was, the Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who was very, very stingy with his praise. But he does speak very highly, of course, of Dvar Shmuel, and mentions how the Chacham Tzvi, his father, would attribute any success he had in Ruchnius and in learning all to a bracha that he got when he was young from the Dvar Shmuel. So he was a very, very important Rav. So the Tshuvas, besides their great historical value, of course, are also a very important halachic source.
Then we have there's a few beautiful copies of early Abarbanel. I mean, the Abarbanel, discussed in the podcast, could discuss more. I'm a big fan of the Abarbanel. And the Abarbanel, so there's a beautiful copy. And these are early Venice, so they have really wide margins, really beautiful. You can see in the title page. So this is early on when they have title pages. And actually, stay tuned. A forthcoming AuctionChatter miniseries in the early age of Jewish print, especially on the 16th century. So we'll get into more for listeners what this means. But if you can look online, you can see where they have these really wide margins in the title page. It's not like today you open a book and the title page is like fits the page like exactly. This is not like that. So they're extra wide. The margin on the side, I don't know if they write notes or whatever. So you have Abarbanel Nachlas Avos is lot 3. That's his commentary on Pirkei Avos. Really beautiful commentary. Very lengthy as the style of Abarbanel, but he quotes everyone and anyone who came before him. He works off of a few commentaries. He quotes non-Jews, philosophers. He's quoting all different figures. Then you have Abarbanel's Rosh Hashanah. That is, I believe, defending the Rambam from the Beis Albo, from the Ikrim. And then there's Abarbanel on Nach, there's Abarbanel on Torah, there's Abarbanel Merkevas and Mishnah, which Merkevas and Mishnah is his Pirush on Devarim. That was the first book that he wrote. He actually talks about there, where he was after he was expelled from Spain and he found his commentary was lost on the island. There's a whole story. So there's a couple of really beautiful early editions of Abarbanel.
And I would just mention as well that a lot of times the wide margins speak to the provenance of the sefer. Paper wasn't cheap back then, and they printed it on big wide margins for buyers that would spend the money on it. So very often you'll find that's farm that weren't in use in the base medrash. But they sat in a place of prominence for a while. Those are the farm that the big wide margins are still preserved.
Also, many Svarim were later rebound and they got trimmed because some binders, I don't need all this extra, and he cut it all off. Unfortunately, sometimes, by the way, in those when you see a trimmed book, they lost that you had annotations, marginalia, you had who the owner was, or some provenance. They all cut off. So when you have these really wide margin books, those are the original. So they're really beautiful, beautiful copies. They're in the original, not always necessarily in the original binding, but they really are a beautiful copy. So there's a couple of those real classics, and again, really, there's some really, really nice, top quality classics in this collection. You have a Sefer Ikrim, which is lot 9, and there you see kind of more of the original, the earlier title pages where it wasn't as elaborate with a border and other things as some of them. It just says Sefer Ikrim, Asher Yosad V'Chibur Achacham, and it says Beis Albo, and then it says in bold Venezia. So it was printed in Venice. You have the early Sefer Ikrim. Lot 10, you have Shvile Amuna, which is Rameir al-Dabi. I think I've talked about it a little bit. Rameir al-Dabi. Rameir al-Dabi he says he's a descendant of the Rosh. I don't think we know exactly how, and it's a very interesting book where it's on Amuna, but he quotes all sorts of quotes. He's quoting Galen, he's quoting Doctor, he's quoting all the kind of the science of his day and the philosophers and those type of things, as well as Amunah. So very interesting, kind of in the old style Sefer.
A parallel maybe from a later Tkufa would be the Sefer Abris from Pinchas Horowitz, again, after the science had advanced a lot and the battlefield of Amunah had advanced a lot. But it's a similar kind of work showing that, showing a healthy engagement with the sciences and still a very right-wing, strong hashkafa.
Lot 16 is a nice work. It's the second edition of Milos Amidus. Milos Amidus was once upon a time a very classic Mussar Sefer. Actually, personally, when I was in Philly, I believe it was back in first year, this was one of the Mussar from I picked up somehow. I came to it and I started learning it. A really beautiful Sefer. This one actually is the first Hebrew book printed in Cremona. So this is Cremona, Italy, 1556, and it's exactly what it is. It's Milos Amidus, and it runs through different midas, and it. Telling you in a Mussar, it's a real classical Mussar Sefer, and so this was printed by Rabbi Chil. It's not printed by, Rabbi Chil Anav is the author, and so that's lot 16, a really nice edition of that. There's a couple of Svarim from Rabbi Skarama, which is one of them is Yad Avshalom. Interestingly, that's his Pirush Mishlei, and then lot 20 is the Venice edition of Rabbi Shmuel Arki Avolti's Arugas Aboisim, which I think, Ramesh, we talked about this at one point, right?
We did mention this. It was part of the very celebrated episode of what's known now as the Reina Batya episode, where Baruch Epstein quotes the Nitziv's wife, quoting this sefer. And there was a big discussion: did she actually have the sefer or not? The way he references the sefer seems that that Baruch Epstein himself wasn't perfectly aware of what it was. It's essentially a book of letters, and which really that's the way it's set up. It's a book of different letters, including letters to one's fiance, letters to relatives, letters to this, letters to that. It's to teach people how to write prose eloquently and with proper grammar. He says bunch of interesting things in there as well. One of them, which is quoted by Baruch Epstein about women who had who had achieved distinction in Torah and Chachma. So that was in that episode we got into the good, the bad, and the ugly with Baruch Epstein, and this was exhibit number 1 was this Sefer Arukas Haboisim, which may not have been that as common as Baruch Epstein would like you to believe, but this is a surviving copy, a very, very nice Sefer.
Now I'll turn it over. Lot 22 is something else also that I know you looked at extensively and you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, Lot 22 is it's and they put this in the byline here. It was published by it's essentially a tchinis kind of sefer tchinis that you would use. It has the Vidu Hagadol and Seder Avodah and other tefillos that you would use with Italian translations. And the book was either edited or printed, or maybe it was set by Devorah Ascarelli. And Devorah Ascarelli is a very interesting person because it's already written here on the title page. It refers to Devorah Ascarelli as the Hebrew, the Jew. And the reason that's important was because her family was a very prominent family in Rome, and Rome of then is not Rome of today with their humanitarian emphasis and their egalitarian sensitivities. But in those days, Rome was very strong, very powerful. And if any member of the family indicated that this family was leaning towards baptism, then the church would get very active, and they'd even imprison the other members of the family. And that had happened to her family. So she lost her children and her close relatives, her parents, to the church. They were kidnapped and they were held in prison until they would convert. She refused, and that's why on her title page here it refers to her as Devorah Ascarelli Hebrea, the Jew. It's unique. It's unique because it has, it's women in publishing is always unique, but in this case, it has some of her own poetry, and she was very active in the publishing. And the person who she was is very, tragic, but very important historical figure.
Yeah, really fascinating in that sense. It's not your classic sefer, and as they note, it's here early on in the section because it says Ascarelli Devorah, and then it says Moshe Rietti. They put it, because of Devorah Ascarelli. That's what really makes this a fascinating work. So that's Lot 22. Lot 23 is Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi, Rabbi Eliezer Haroife Ashkenazi, and this is Venice in 1583. So Ma'aseh Hashem, I don't know if we've discussed it in that. First of all, just as a personal aside, Ma'aseh Hashem needs to be redone, but because it's not, and there's even the old print, it's not really available. But this is beautiful edition of Ma'aseh Hashem, and Ma'aseh Hashem he's more known today, I would think, for his commentary on the Haggadah. He also has a commentary on Esther, you guys have Lekach, which is known because it's published with a lot of the Goin, because the Goin, took a lot of it. It's right, exactly what the Goin is on Esther. So, but Ma'aseh Hashem is his lengthy commentary on the Torah. But and as they write here, in the byline, it says Ma'aseh Hashem, commentary to the 6 days of creation, ethics of the fathers, the Passover, Haggadah, the text, and various biblical portions. Which is essentially what it is. It's not. He doesn't have parsha by parsha. It's not exactly every parsha. It's very lengthy on where it is, but it's really Yesodis, Mamish Yesodis. Rabbi Ashkenazi was a fascinating figure. There was once actually a small English book, probably a translation of his travels. He traveled all over. He was from Egypt. He was in Cyprus. Went to Italy. Died in Poland. He was all traveling all over. He was very involved in many different things. He was a fascinating figure. He was a rationalist. He made many different. He was just again a very, very, very important thinker. And Parshan, I guess you would say, and then this is the edition of Ma'aseh Hashem in 1583.
A lot of people may know him from the Maharal of Prague, who carries on an extensive critique. The Maharal critiques a few of his contemporaries, like Dirasi, of course, and then Ma'aseh Hashem also was such an important machshava type of sefer. Again, like you said, it's Parshanos, but in his Parshanos he weaves in a lot of hashkafa and. He was a very, very tremendous Talmid Chacham, widely respected wherever he went, whether in Ashkenaz or beyond. And therefore, the Maharal felt that he had to take issue with some of the hashkafas, which weren't perfectly in line with the Maharal's own outlook. But this is a very essential book of Jewish hashkafa as well.
and you mentioned De Rossi, Marinayim, which we've talked about in the past. De Rossi, there's one of the lots in here is Marinayim, as anything with such classics should have a copy of Marinayim in this collection, which there is a beautiful copy of Marinayim, Rosario De Rossi, first printed book to be put in Cherem, and it was the Rechem, maybe the Yosef, and then the Maharal later on, decries it, but the Maharal's Talmidim, Teziyamtiv, Rav Gans, others quote it, and others quote it, and that whole story. But one of the interesting things is there was a tshuva, I think in the 19th century, there was published a manuscript and from Menachem Kohen Rappaport, the Mincha Blula, where he says he was in, I forget if he was Cremona or in Verona at the time, and he says that, he was talking about the whole Cherem going on in Italy. That was the Cherem in Italy that they were running Chayzer from the Marinayim. And he says, I spoke in shul, but I'm not sure what to do. I'm waiting for Blaz Ashkenazi to return. He's not here. I want to hear from Blaz Ashkenazi what he thinks about the Marinayim before I say anything publicly. What should happen? We need to ask the Ma'as Hashem. We have to ask him his opinion of Marinayim. So he was involved in that. He was all over this is Italian Rabbanim says what was going on in Italy in the 16th century.
Wow. And
so this is his real classic work. Ala Torah, I guess. Again, the Haggadah part is in here as well. So that is lot 23. And continuing along, there's some other really nice classics in here. Lot 28, just to mention, is the Binyamin Zev. So the Binyamin Zev, Binyamin ben Mattis of Arta of Greece. This is a very controversial in the sense, and I think most people don't know what Binyamin Zev is, but this was a very interesting page. First of all, this is the first, I believe, I'm going to get this right, Halacha Sefer, or definitely Chuvas, printed in the lifetime of the author, I believe. Also, he was on most of them, I don't know about this one, but most copies of many copies, he was the editor, and we even have marginal notes from him. I don't know about this copy. It's very famous because also the title page was famous, but it's interesting. It says, Zeh Sefer, Nikish Shmei Yisrael, Binyamin Zev. Chibroi was written by Haluf Hamar Ha'olov, Marav Rabbeinu Binyamin, Ben Ramatas Yazal, Vinitpas by Venezia, not Venezia, Rabasti, Bebeis Asar, Daniel Bombergi, etc. And he writes it, etc. So he talks about it. It's famous. Zeh Sefer, Nikish Shmei Yisrael, Binyamin Zev. That was what it was called. And Meir Ben-Yo, the famous scholar, has a whole book. He printed a facsimile edition of Binyamin Zev, and he has a whole introduction talking about Binyamin Zev and all the controversies about Binyamin Zev and all the issues. Some quoted it. It was quoted in Halacha, but there are many, and again, you could look at there extensively, and many that had big issues with it and said, you can't quote it, it's full of errors, you can't quote this book Halacha ever, it's no good, everything he says is wrong. His big Bar Plukta, there's a copy in this collection as well, as the Radach, Rab David HaKohen of Corfu. And so there was that, but his son-in-law defended him, the Binyamin Zev. I believe his son-in-law is, if I remember correctly, Rabbi Shmuel Kelly, or one of those, another. So the son-in-law defended him. He said this is a real early controversial sefer. Again, real classic, one of the real classic 16th century Chuvas Farim, Binyamin Zev.
The basis of the controversy, it's not, today when we talk about controversial Sfarim, we're talking about usually from a hashkavar perspective. That wasn't the issue back then. That may have been the issue with the Marinayim, but that was not the issue with Binyamin Zev. Binyamin Zev, he was a very independent-minded halachist. And when people are independent and they don't rely on precedent and quote, and pay the proper homage to all the people who came before them and rely on previous psukim, so it's going to ruffle feathers, especially if it's not someone where they would expect to be following in and of himself. So that's really what it was. It was the other Rabbanim who were reacting to some of his very bold and independent halachic style.
As one would imagine, and those familiar with Chuvas Farim, and what controversy erupts at a Chuvas Farim, it's usually Ishus, and it's usually Aguna and Gittin, and this is one of the major controversies. There was a guy, Moshe Susi, and he gave, his wife was an Aguna or not, and Rabbi Binyamin said he was, Mesiach Lefituma, he was good enough, and the Radach took issue, and he started yelling about him, and he started went after him, so this became a whole Gansa Maisa, and they were fighting about it, and you had everyone getting involved, and Rabbi Binyamin's Rebbeim were upset at him, and, this is, again, one of these type of things. And the Rabbanim in Venice got upset. So Venice at the time, Venice is a republic. It's the Republic of Venice. Venice is a country. And so Venice is in control of a lot of these Greek islands over there, the outlet where he lived. So they were in charge, Rabbanim in Venice, and he went there. So this became a whole to-do, essentially. This is, for Rabbi Shmuel Diana got involved. This is for, those who know all the Rabbanim in Italy who got involved in this at the time. And again, this is one of his, but on the other hand, this is a very, very famous and very important tshuva sefer.
In no small part because the Ramah frequently cites him, and the Ramah is similar in a lot of ways, and he's taken to task by that by his elder cousin the Marshal. But the Ramah was also very independent minded, and he didn't have a problem with the Chuvas Binyamin Zev's independent and bold mahalach, and that's why he quotes it. Now the difference is that the Ramah was already widely accepted as the final address. By the time. He was renowned as the Paisek, what we call today the Paisek Hador. So therefore, his independence doesn't engender the same kind of criticism that Binyamin Zev does.
One day, perhaps I'll do a podcast on Binyamin Zev because he really is worthy of that. But just to say that the Marshal is one of them who went after the Binyamin Zev. And he says the Marshal was another one of those very sharp. He was very sharp. What he wrote, and he said, I say, I warn the public, nobody should go after this book, Binyamin Zev. Even to ban something, to answer something, but kal v'chaymer leheter, for sure to be mad to something. Ella sheyidaktek achar dvarav heitiv besugis atamav v'apaiskim via pshuta. Go, make sure you learn it up. Don't trust this guy. Ki kol dvarav genuvim v'aruchim bepilpul she'en l'tzarech, and he goes on and he bashes him, and then he says afterwards, v'shari le'marei. Says, forgive me, Tzaddik. Why would Hashem bring something wrong on him if it was a tzaddik? He gave it over. He printed it. So Marshal says what we said before. The Binyamin Zev actually gave it to the print. He printed it. He was involved with it. How could it be? But like Moshe just said, the Ramah does quote it. The Ramah is involved. So it's hard to really say. It's one of these very complicated, complex books. It's definitely well worth checking out. There's more. The Chidah talks about it, and the Beis of Karo doesn't bring it down. He says, why does Beis of Karo bring it down if it really was good? And so there's much more to go on about and talk about Binyamin Zev, but just in brief, just to talk about a very, very, very important sefer.
And a classic. Definitely a classic.
Yeah, one of the classics. So that's, as well. Okay, so there are a number of very nice edition of Bible, and Bible either meaning Bible just Chumashim or Mekreis Kedailis. So there's a bunch of really different ones that are interesting. Yeah.
If there's the art lovers, besides for the one art piece in this collection, there is the Lot 38, which has a Chumash from Amsterdam, 1726. But this one has 6 title pages. Each one of them are really brilliantly. They weren't printed with color. They didn't have color printing back then, or not a lot of colors anyway. But they were all decorated afterwards. This is worth looking at. This is the Lot 38 with these brilliantly colored in, painted title pages.
Yeah, people used to color it in, and so some of these items, some of the Bible and Mekreis Kedailos is a big deal. You'll be able to go and just take a Chumash and learn everything in it. Lot 41 is Chumash Derech Selula. Chumash Derech Selula was a later edition. This is printed in Fjorda, which is in Fürth in Germany, and this edition is printed 1801, 1803. But what Derech Selula is, it is the beer. It has Mendelssohn's commentary, if you will. Although, to clarify, Mendelssohn didn't write the whole commentary. Mendelssohn did the German translation. The commentary on Shemais is Mendelssohn. The other ones are different. Bereshis is Shlomo Dubno. Vayikra is Naftali Hertz or Hartwig Wesley. Bamidbar is Aaron Yaroslav, and Dvarim is Hertz Hamburg. Mendelssohn has comments here there, but this is Derech Selula was a later edition. It used to be called Nesivos Shalom. They changed the name. Derech Selula became this one, and you can see if you look on the title page on this one. Actually, the title page doesn't say it here. V'targam Ashkenazi Ubir, and it says V'hugav Pi Chumash Al Itzik Premishal. It doesn't say on the title page, but they write it in the thing. So if you want to,
I think it's a full set. It shows you that it's kind of ubiquitous at this time in Germany. Shortly after Mendelssohn's time, I think this is 1801.
Yeah, not long after.
Not long afterwards, but at that point already, this is all over. Stam Targum and beer. Stam German Targum and beer is, of course, Mendelssohn, and again, there was no copyrights then, so everybody's free to take it.
Yeah. Well, this is Jewish copyright's a whole other thing, right? That's how Haskama started, and so on. Lot 45, it's got beautiful binding, but Lot 45 is Torah Solekim, the law of God, edited and with former translations, diligently compared and revised by Isaac Leeser. So this is Isaac Leeser's Chumash. This is Philadelphia, 1845, 1846. So first of all, Americana, I think I've talked about, I don't remember. Americana is a big deal. American, Judaica from the really, we're talking 19th century. And this is Isaac Leeser. Isaac Leeser. So I hope to get the podcast on Isaac Leeser, because Isaac Leeser really is deserving of a podcast. There's a phenomenal book on Isaac Leeser written by Lance Sussman called Isaac Leeser and the Making of American Judaism. Highly, highly recommend, by the way, if anyone wants to read about Leeser. And Leeser was the Chazan, or call him a Rav, a rabbi. He didn't have smicha. He came from Germany, and he was in Philadelphia. He published a newspaper for many years, a periodical, The Accident, OCC, not The Accident, The Accident, and he published that, and he translated, he had sermons, and he had a Chumash, and this is his Chumash, this is his English translation, this is his Chumash, and as they quote from his introduction, it says, "I doubt whether the precious word of God ever appeared among us in a more beautiful form than the volumes in which I am now engaged. I thought in all due humility, that I might safely go to the task, confidently relying upon that superior aid, which is never withheld from the inquirer after truth." And really, he says, he continues on, and I also forgot to mention that at this time, although Leeser was German, the community that he was, the S&P community, the Spanish-Portuguese community, really, which was, he was a Chazan for the Sephardi community, is where he was, and he wrote, "My intention was to furnish a book for the service of the synagogue, both German and Portuguese," is what he says, although, again, he was very involved with the Spanish and Portuguese, and he says, and just continuing on, "I have to state that I have not looked at a single work issued by the English Jews, and that hence I have not borrowed a single idea or suggestion for any one of them, living or dead," is what he says. And, he was working on, again, he translated various things throughout the Accident. He was working on many things. So this is a really beautiful set of the Leeser Bible.
That was a sign of the times, pretty much, where the climate in America was very anti-British. They didn't, downplaying any dependency that they might have on the British Jews. So the fact that American Jews can produce their own chumashim of great quality, and they are, still they stand the test of time. Not as old as some of the other things here in this collection, but definitely they stand out for their beauty. And like you said, he was the rabbinic functionary of the S&P congregation, which is why scattered throughout this collection there are other Leesers, and the Sidurim there do follow the Spanish-Portuguese rites.
Yeah, and again, Leeser is just a really fascinating, very, very important figure, and I hope to discuss Leeser much more at length on the podcast. This is a lot more to talk about Leeser. He's involved in many different things, in many different areas and facets of Jewish life in America and early American Jewry in the 19th century. So this is a set of his Bible, lot 45, beautiful binding. Actually, right now, as of this recording, I don't usually say prices because the prices go up and down. Right now, it's a bit of $2,400. Doesn't seem so crazy. Many Leeser items go for $1,000, especially nice sets. This is early Americana, as they call it. Lot 47, 48 are two different things, two different svarim from Rav Shmuel Chagiz, Mevakesh Hashem and Dvar Shmuel. So Rav Shmuel Chagiz, or Chagiz, is Rav Moshe Chagiz's grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz, his father, Lachas Katanas. And what's interesting about him is, first of all, it's just very interesting, you see how sometimes you have these generations spanning, sometimes people have in a few 30 years, you could have father, son, grandson. Rav Shmuel Chagiz, he publishes this book in Venice in 1596. Now he dies in 1633, and his son Rav Moshe Chagiz is into the 18th century. So he published in 1596, and his grandson's still going in the 1700s. So it's interesting. But Rav Moshe Chagiz, he came originally from Morocco, and he travels around. Mevakesh Hashem, which is the first lot, is a bunch of drushes that he has a number of drushes, and then Dvar Shmuel, which is his commentary Medrash Rabbah on Dvarim, that is the lot 48. These are two very nice forum. It has the classic, a lot of the classic later Venice prints that got on the title page, got the curved columns, like the flowers on top, similar to Sharblat and the Gemara. Now, going on to lot 49, which is a commentary on Perek Shira by Hanania of, I'm probably going to butcher the Italian, Mansi Liels. This is a commentary. So Perek Shira, first of all, is also a very interesting collection of sayings, essentially. And so this Reb Hanani, he lived in the 16th century. He was a Talmud of the Ramah Mifano, and he was called a Chosid, and he serves as he was a Rav in Ferrara and in Buseto and some other places. So he had a couple of forms. One of them is this. He has Alter Chasoid, and he has three Maimar Apsicha, Maimar Yomim, Maimar Hatzfardeya. And this book was printed later on. He didn't live to see it being printed. And he had there's a number of other, he had a son who also wrote a book on I think he had two sons that also wrote commentaries on Perek Shira. It seems like this was like a family thing. I don't know, they used to learn Perek Shira in his house. So this is his book on Perek Shira. That is lot 49. Lot 53 is Sefer Imrei Noyam, Rabbi Yaakov Deliskus. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce his name. We don't really know much about him, but I think many people today are not familiar probably with the Sefer at all. I have there was a reprinted edition a number of years ago in a volume together with Pshatim Yurim, Yaakov Vienna. I don't think this is around anymore. You can't get it. But what's just interesting to know, this is a classic Sefer, the Imre Noam with the Chidah. Just tell you what the Chidah says about the Sefer. He says, Imre Noam, it's Chibra al Torah. It's a collection of Torah. Me'asef Chidushim Rishonim. Many Chidushim Rishonim. V'ukilis Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Delekash, or Deliskos. V'yesh boi Chidushim Rabbi Sinu Balei Toisos. It has a lot of Balei Toisos. V'nitzvah Pamayim Shalosh, was, the Chidah is written, printed a bunch of times. V'gan Nitzvah Etzla Mikra Tfus Amsterdam. And one of the Amsterdam Chumashim was printed next to the Chumash. I believe this is in the 1707 Chumash there. V'yesh boi Tuyas Amatik. But again, the Chidah has mistakes over there. And the Chidah keeps telling you about this, and he says when the Chidah talks about Das Zakein of the Balei Toisos, it says it has a lot from the Balei Toisos in the Sefer Imre Noam. The Imre Noam is, was quoted. We know it's used by a lot of Svarim. There's a Sefer Imre Shefer al Torah quotes it. The Marsha and Chidush Haggadah in Megillah, and Baba Basra quotes it. The Bach in his commentary on Rus, coming up to Rusna Meshav Nefesh, the Bach has come to us. He quotes the Sefer. The Tzed Laderech on Rashi of the Beersheva quotes it. The Sifsei Chachamim quotes it. Again, it's quoted in a number of Svarim. What's interesting is many people today will say, "Ooh, Imre Noam, I have no idea who you're talking about. What is the Sefer?" One of those Svarim that kind of isn't as well known, but this is this is the second edition, again, because it's printed a number of times. This is the second edition already in Cremona in 1566. Shows you how, obviously, it was a popular book to be printed twice in the 16th century, and so it's a very nice edition of it. That's lot 53. Lot 54 is Azari de Rossi's Morinayim, as we mentioned before. Lot 56 is just worth mentioning is Tashbat's is Cheshek Shlomo, a lengthy commentary by the Tashbat's Shlomo ben Samach Duran on Mishlei. This was I believe it's not been republished either. And
even though there is interest in the Rashbats, starting with his Chuvas from Mechayin Shalayim and some of his Pirushim on Avis came out in a few different editions. There is interest, but this one, which kind of feeds into what you were just saying before, how when you review these catalogs, you review these collections, you can't help but be struck by the different preferences that today's Svarim readers and learners had, and from the times gone by, different things went through a bunch of printings in the 1500s. You would think such a thing is a real hot item, and then today you almost don't even hear about it anymore. There's a couple such items, and maybe we'll point them out as we go through this.
Yeah. Okay. So as we continue going, we'll try to go a little quicker, run through some of the other very interesting, a couple of items from Bishak Aliko. There's again, lot 67. I just want to mention is the Radach, David Kohen of Corfu. That's quite an interesting title page. It has like flowers, it's got a whole bunch of elaborate title page around, like the left and the bottom is a lot, and then in the middle, all the text is like crammed in. There's a lot of text in the middle. It's a very interesting title page, but then the your title page. Lot 70, Moshe talking about is Mika Moicha. In addition to Mika Moicha, Yehuda Levi. We did a podcast on this once a few years ago.
Yes, we did, and we this Sefer actually highlights some of what we were talking about then. We were talking about how that it was part of the synagogue tradition was. It was a highlight. It was a highlight of the Shabbos before Purim. Today we call it Shabbos Zachar, but in the Ottoman Empire they called it the Shabbos of Mika Moicha because they would say this poem, and that's why there's a need for separate printings of just this poem. Now the poem's first words are Adoin Chazdecha Bal Yechtal. It starts with Aleph Beis. So it says here on the title page, this is the Mika Moicha from Yehuda Levi. Everybody calls it Mika Moicha, but don't be confused that this is the official name is Adoin Chazdecha, and on the title page itself it says here, we discussed this in the podcast, when these poems were originally supposed to be meant, and the reason it was called a Mika Moicha was because it was supposed to feed in to the words Mika Moicha right after Oz Yashir, but the later generations moved it. So here already in this Italian community in Venice in 1586, on the title page it says, when do we say this? Shenoyagim lo emer b'Shabbos shelfnei Purim, Ben Misha Berach la'ashrei. Misha Berach is at the end of Laning. There's the Misha Berach for the Kahal. That's the big Misha Berach. And between that and Ashrei of Musaf. So that's when they would say it at this point in time. So it's of historical interest.
Okay. Now, lot 73, I know you wanted to speak about, is Mifchar Pninim. Shlomo Ibn Gabirol. This is one of the Incanabula. So one of the, forgive the pun, one of the pearls of this collection of Sonsino, 1484. And this is another wide-margined copy. But I think we should talk about Reb Shlomo Ibn Gibirol and Mivchar Pninim, as they say, are a collection of ethical maxim, proverbs, and moral reflections. Really what Mivchar Pninim is. And Mivchar Pninim, Reb Shlomo Ibn Gibirol, is one of the classical, this is a real classical Sephardi style sefer of the early Sephardi more rationalistic school, poetic school, if you will. So, Moshe, I know you have written a lot about this. You've talked a lot about these type of stuff. So I'll give this to you to explain to the listener.
So I'll start with where you left off, where you mentioned this is Sephardi. It's important for listeners to know the distinction. There's Sepharad, and there's also Andalusia. And they're very different. Sephardic Jewry was, in modern Sephardic Jewry, at least from the Ramban and on, was under Christian Europe. And very little Muslim influence. There's a big debate about the Ramban himself. The Ramban himself, who when he was younger, he still was exposed to some Andalusian works and authors. That's a discussion for another time. But the Spain of Reb Shlomo ibn Gabirol is very, very different from the Spain of let's say the Rajba or the Rush, and later generations, because this Spain, this Andalus, is under the influence of Muslim culture, and very, very strong Muslim culture. And in particular, this Sefer itself is representative of that, because the Muslims preserved a lot of Sfarim. Essentially, it's like Mishlei. We have, the Tanakh has Mishlei. Mishlei is a collection of Musar proverbs. Koheles is similar. It's a sad, tragic commentary on life, but again, a collection of individual statements strung together, not no narrative. That's the point. And the Arabs, the Muslims, developed a whole genre of literature which they called adab. Adab was maxims geared for ethical enhancement and improvement. So the Mivchar Pninim that we have today is a translation of an earlier Arabic collection. And it's not an original collection. It's not original thought. It's a collection, like Kishmoy Kenhu. And who authored this collection? It's widely believed to be Reb Shlomo ibn Gabirol. Some people would say that Shlomo ibn Gabirol was such a genius. He wrote such genius poetry, and he did. And coming up now, Sephardim will be saying on Shavuos, they'll be saying the Azharot of Reb Shlomo ibn Gabirol. Reb Shlomo ibn Gabirol put the whole entire Taryag Mitzvahs to an amazing poem. And if you just look at it, you'll be, I don't know if we spoke about it here in the podcast, but you'll be blown away by the brilliance and the genius of it. And it's a whole debate. Was the Rambam talking about Reb Shlomo ibn Gabirol when he discussed his displeasure with earlier authors of Azharot? But in any event, Reb Shlomo ibn Gabirol was a brilliant genius, a great Talmudist, very original. So some people say, why would he collect in Arabic from existing Arabic maxims? It doesn't make sense. So some people have argued that it wasn't him, but the yichus comes from Rabbi Yosef Kimchi, the Radak's father, in his own work of adab literature. In Hebrew, he talks about the influence that the Mivchar Pninim made on him, and he says that this Mivchar Pninim was originally collected by Reb Shlomo Gabirol in his youth, and translated by Rabbi Yehuda ben Tibin, the Avi of the Tiboinim, the Avi Hamatikim, the first of the provincial translators of fine Arabic works into Hebrew. So definitely, and this work was very, very influential. A great article was written on this by Ratzabi, Professor Yehuda Ratzabi of Yemenite extraction. He studied for a lot of years to find in the Arabic literature today what he believes are the sources for these maxims. Just let me take a break now, just to give you a sense of the kind of what we're talking about, in case you're not familiar with Mivchar Pninim. A very popular sefer in its time is another example. But today, maybe you walk into your local farm store today. I don't know that you'll be able to find one on the shelf, but they're just I'll read you a few of them. Omar HaChacham, Devar Emes Toiv Mehashtika Mimenu. Speaking the truth is better than concealing it. Let's give you another one. Omar HaChacham, Hamtein v'tinotzel, Maher v'tischaret. If you think twice, you'll be preserved from error, but if you act quickly, you will regret your deeds. These kind of pithy maxims, full of wisdom, full of ethical improvement. So these were all originally in Arabic. So Ratzabi collected the sources that he could find, and based on the sources, he's able to pinpoint exactly when he lived, because of the sources that he uses. But again, it's not an exact science. In the olden days, there wasn't Google. It wasn't, even like today, people say there's common statements, and it's only, you got to look it up. Like, never look a gift horse in the mouth. And you got to look. You'll Google it, you'll find out where it came from. But otherwise, you'll never know. So in the times of the Kadmonim, it wasn't always possible to know. He's the author of this one, and he's the author of the other one. These collections were widely expanded on and borrowed from freely, so it's impossible to pinpoint with any certainty exactly what comes from where. So it's not entirely sure, it's an exact science, like I said. But again, you have the Jewish people did believe at the time that it was Maimon Gabriel. There is that likelihood. Very popular sefer, went through print after print after print. This is at once, it's an incunabula of a classic which went through a great number of printings. There are printings which attribute this to Rabbi Daya Panini, the Bardashi who lived contemporary of the Rashba. I think that just resulted from the name Panini. They must have associated that with the Mivchar Paninim. I don't think there's any possibility because it predated him. Yehuda Mitivin and Yosef Kimchi predated the Rabbi Daya Panini. So I think that's an impossibility. From all I have read, and there's a lot of literature, this already in the times of Steinschneider and the Wissenschaft era, everybody was debating this question. I think the likelihood that it is Gabriel is high, but in any event, it's somebody like that. An Andalusian sage with an appreciation of fine literature who collected these items, and it was important enough that the Hebrew-speaking Jews wanted to get in on the action, and that's why it was translated early on into Hebrew.
Yeah, and I should mention also that you mentioned not available in your local farm, so it's true. And we are talking about the Kestenbaum catalog, but it's worth it to mention that the Dot Press did publish a Hebrew-English translation of it recently. And just to mention another one that's very, like you say, these little pithy things. Whatever you wish to conceal from your enemy, do not reveal to your friend. Someone told the secret to his friend and asked if he understood. He said, I understood, and then I forgot. How can one keep a secret, deny the messenger, and conceal the message? How can one keep a secret? Bury it deep in your heart. He's really piling on. He's driving home this point. And just to finish this, chapter, so Amar Chacham, like Gilali Adam Oilam Soid Shefkarativ V'Hashamtiv. Aval Hashamti as Libi Mipnei Shahayatzar Yoisr Lehachlis Ba'eshev Karativ B'Liboy. I never blamed anyone who passed on a secret I entrusted to him. I blamed myself because I was unable to prevent myself from sharing it. V'Amar Misha Liboy Tzar Lashonei Rachav. If your heart is too narrow, your tongue will be too wide. V'Amar you are in charge of your secrets. If you share them, they will control you. A secret can only be shared by two people. Once three know it, it will not remain hidden. And really, I think that's just a really good one, a good example of what he's saying. This kind of really wonderful ethical little quotes and little quips, and that's Mivchar Paninim. And this is, one of the early Hebrew books, and in Kanabala 1484, since, this beautiful copy here in this collection here, lot 73. Then we will come on. There's lot 76 and 77 is Psakim Uksavim, and then Shumas Hadeshin. Two parts of Shumas Hadeshin. The Shumas Hadeshin, the Psakim Ukavar of Israel Isserline. Shumas Hadeshin, whether it is Shuvas, but it's not Shuvas. The Shumas Hadeshin wrote it himself. He made it up. Again, Ein Kan Makayma. We can get into this at a different time about Shumas Hadeshin. Those are in Italy. There's a couple of early Sfarim of the Ramah as well over here. One of them being Sefer Mechir Yayin, his commentary on Pirkei Avos,
and another being his Teres
on Megillah Esther. I know it's Pirkei Avos. Yeah, should have that. Yes, go ahead.
And Teres Oila, which is his philosophical work, built very much on Rambam, which is kind of unique because at this time, at the times of the Ramah, the Sephardim already are losing interest in philosophy. This is after the Girush Sfarad, which a lot of people blame on philosophy, and the Sephardim are losing interest in the Moreh Nevuchim, but it's being picked up by intellectuals in Europe, and primarily the Ramah. The Ramah is everybody famously quote in the Shulchan Aruch right away starts with a quote from Moreh Nevuchim, and here you go. Here's his Teres Ha'olah, which is built on the philosophy of the Rambam.
Lot 82 is Zohar, the first edition of the Zohar, and this is published in This is published in 1558, 1560. First of all, I said before it's just an alphabetical. I just had a laugh reading the catalog. It says Kabbalah in parentheses, and it says Shimon Bar Yochai. It's just funny when you see it.
Right.
Like, I don't know if anyone's looked on Amazon and they see like Bible, Moses. It has it. It's just like funny when you see like things like that. Like that's how they put the author sometimes. So it's like Shimon Bar Yochai. So the Zayar, if the listeners have heard, I did the series on the Zayar, the reception history of the Zayar rather recently. This is a different, I know Rabbi Dr. David Katz a few months ago did some podcasts on this. This is the first edition. There was a big controversy about printing the Zayar, and how could you be Megala, the Zayar, Megala Soid, Larabim, the Betfus. In general, print was a new medium. You're going and you're publishing it. It's like, it was like social media, Lahavdil today. Like you're putting things online, you're putting things in print out there. How could you do that? And there was, there was a manuscript culture for a long time after. People think in manuscript circulating, put things in print. And this was a big tumult. Professor Boaz Huss talks about this extensively in his book on the Zayar. He has a whole chapter on this, about this controversy. Actually, one of those involved in this, Emmanuel Benvenuto, I think his book called Livas Chain, is one in this collection. He was one of those that was very pro it. There was a back and forth. There was a big tumult to print it. And at the end of the day, this is the first edition. Beautiful. It's got 5 parts in 3 volumes. It's got the whole thing. This is Lot 82, just to give a reference again, throw out another price, $13,000. But this is the first edition of the Zayar. So in 5 volumes and with a nice title page. And so that's Lot 82.
And I'll mention that the debate never really was laid to rest, because even with the publication of the Zayar is not like later Kabbalistic literature. The Zayar is drushes on the Torah, stories, drushes, with a Kabbalistic undertone, but it's not straight up the Kabbalistic system. It doesn't describe how things work like later Kestenbaum. Certainly not like that Rizal with his very, very elaborate system and with all the rules of that, making sense of the cosmos and making sense of the universe from a Kabbalistic perspective. You don't have any of that in the Zayar. It's drushes al Torah based on a Kabbalistic appreciation of the world, but there were those who read the Zayar without, also they read it in line with the Rambam, read it in line with philosophy, and it was possible. So even though the Zayar did merit publication, it did not lay that debate to rest. And later generations and later Sefer Kabbalah, again, you had the same question over and over again, particularly with the Rizal's Ksavim and from Chaim Vital's recension. Again, probably till this very day, you'll have different schools of thought on this question.
Jumping ahead to Lot 87, another Incanabula. And first of all, it's just so interesting to see what was published in the first century. Like, what were they going to run in print? Obviously, they have Rashi and other things, but, we discussed already Mivcha Prinim, and now it's Kleinibus, but Kleinibus is Evan Boichen. What is Evan Boichen? So listeners of the podcast might be familiar to some extent with Evan Boichen. I did a podcast a few months ago titled Medieval Purim Parodies with Dr. Ronnie Cohen, who is publishing a book, there's a dissertation about these medieval Purim parodies. He focused on Evan Boichen, Kleinibus ben Kleinibus, and the Ralbag, or purportedly his Sefer Chavak book, and some others. These were parodies. This was humor, essentially, in those days. And this is what Evan Boichen is. And Ramosha, perhaps you want to talk more about it. Again, I will for listeners over there to the podcast to hear more about Evan Boichen, but I know, Moshe, I know you wanted to say a word or two about this work.
It's in contemporary discourse. A lot of people you may hear of. I don't know. A lot of people. It's a strong. Famous is a strong word, but this Sefer, this Evan Boichen, which is, like you said, parodies, poems, little ditties. It's patterned after Sefer Bechinas Olam, which is written by Yedaya Pnini. Also with Musar maxims, but more poetic. So this is a sefer built on that model, and what's garnered a lot of attention in modern times is one poem in particular where he bemoans having been born a man and wishing he could have been born a woman. So today everybody's like, oh, you see that this, the earliest, had he lived today, he would definitely become a transgender. But these. Forgive me for saying this, but these people lack a sense of humor. They don't understand parody. I think it's an excellent example. I mean, this poem in particular, I want to pull it up here, read you some snippets from it. You can see it's straight up parody, just like the rest of the Sefer, and just like his Maseches Purim. That's the way he wrote. Oy li imi yiliditani ben zacher. Oy, woe to me, my mother, that you ever bore a son. Hefsadati hefsid meruba v'yatza kol sachar. Zachar. And he talks about because he was born with an arla, what a disgrace, and he had to cut it off. He had to go through a surgery. And then later in the poem, he talks about men have so many mitzvahs, they're so encumbered by mitzvahs they have to do. He ends off his poem, Uma daber uma oimer, lama evka ulama esmarmar. Im avi shabayim gazer alai v'nosan bi mum kavua. If God has given me this immutable deformity, there's nothing I can do to remove it. To worry about the impossible, it's a pain that nothing will cure. No comfort can be found. So therefore I'm going to bear it. I'm going to bear this mum of having been born a zachar until I die and wither in the ground. That's what I've learned from our tradition. It's so clever. Listen to this. Now that I've learned from our tradition that we bless for both good and for the bad, so therefore I'm going to make a blessing on the bad. And I'm in a voice hushed and weak. Hashem Isha. I bless you, Hashem, that you did not make me a woman. It's almost impossible for me to read this as a pained expression of wishing to be born in another body, thinking he belongs in another body. It's almost inconceivable. It's an art form. It's parody at its finest. It's humor at its best. And I think it's only if you don't have a sense of humor, maybe you can read some other intention into this. But it's great parody.
And if you knew who he was, again, to be clear, also I said before, the episode that I did was focused on Maseches Purim and his other works where he made a parody of the Gemara about Purim, and this is who he was. This is what he was doing. So this is, again, in Canabal, you see what's being printed in Naples in 1489. This is what they were printing. Evan Boychen. This is what everyone wanted to read.
If anybody in 1489 had thought that it was some kind of transgender cry for help, they would not have included this. It's inconceivable. We have to remember to read things the way they were read then. It's not always so easy, but in this case, I don't think it's such a challenge.
Yes, this has to do with a separate thing here, not to get too far afield from what we're discussing here, the catalog, which is we can't always look back. We can't always put ourselves, we can't use our 21st century glasses when looking back. We always try to understand the context and to contextualize what's going on at the time. But, for right or left or wherever you're looking back at things, you have to understand, to look at it and understand what happened at that time and how they would have perceived things and how they would have read things. Not how we read things today or what we think life was like. And this applies, again, to many different areas in many different ways, again, from right to left, however you want to look at this. But this is, again, Evan Bleichen, beautiful copy. You can see here in the picture, lot 87, in this beautiful copy of Incanabla. And it's in Incanabla.
And that poem, if you're looking for it, it's on the page starting right before page, it's 61B. And that's if you land up with this copy starting at $25,000, you'll be a very you'll be a happy man when you read through and chuckle through this poem.
Gorgeous copy. Lot 88 is Toldos Yitzchak of Rabbi Yitzchak Karo, the uncle of the Beis Yosef. I think that's been clear. I think every one printed now is like, there's a mistake to say he was the father of the Beis Yosef. Yes, it was the uncle or the grandfather. It's the uncle of the Beis Yosef. Beautiful book of the Beis Yitzchak Karo. It should be more well known. I feel like it's somewhat known, but maybe not well known enough. So this is Toldos Yitzchak of Rabbi Yitzchak Karo. Another Incanabla, just to mention again, once we were saying Incanabla, just that theme of what was so important is Lot 91, a Sefer Shirashim of the Radak. I think this one is understandable to people probably. Like maybe people don't necessarily learn Radak anymore. To understand why Radak is like the book of this Sefer Shirashim of the lexicon of the biblical terms. This is clearly anyone who looks at any Rishonim or Mefarshim or Chumash or anywhere you see Radak is like in everyone's face. He stares you in the face. Radak is one of the most important commentators, and even though this is not his commentary on Chumash.
And I'll mention also, Nachi, that the readership for such a sefer was broader than just the Jewish community. The Christian Hebraeus at the time were very interested and they were influential in printing and reprinting a lot of these works. We mentioned that we discussed the Eliyahu Bachur's role in this and the help he got from the Christians in publishing these works. They were very sought after works. So the readership and the audience, the buying audience was very, very broad. That's why it was such an important work for everybody then.
Another one of the Incanabla is Lot 97, Ralbag, Pirush al-Torah of the Ralbag, 1474-76. There's the first edition. By the way, this one is a gorgeous copy. It's starting to get $55,000. Ralbag is one of the other ones. Ralbag, we look at with the early editions, and also manuscripts, what were the most influential or used farm on Chumash? Rashi, of course, and Ralbag, and Ibn Ezra. These were the Sfarim that everybody learned, that everyone studied. And so, you look at Lot 97, you see this beautiful edition of Ralbag, and,
Once, in another episode, I think now we spoke about the print for this. The Ralbag is printed in a Neifas Tufim. That's what it was.
That's Neifas Tufim.
Right.
Also, another in Kanabla, 1475.
And it's the same printer. It's Avraham Konat.
Yes.
Whose typeset mimicked his own personal calligraphic handwriting. And people have commented that if you look at this sefer, it looks almost like it's handwritten, because it is. It's a copy of his handwriting, a beautiful print, a unique sefer, of course, a classic Shabbat classic.
I want to talk about Lot 101 for a minute. I don't want to, spend too much time running long already. But Lot 101 is a machzer according to the Roman Rite. So this is a Nusach Roima with the commentary Kamchad Avishuna, Arevechan, and Trevis. And also has commentary, there's Sforno, there's Rambam. So what is this commentary? This is, I think, important to at least say a thing about it. This is printed in 1540. First of all, so the Nusach B'nai Roma is, those today can go to the Roman synagogue. You'll see here, this is not only in Rome, they did it in Italy, Nusach Italki. You had this in Italy. So Italy, as I've said multiple times in the podcast, just in brief, you had the many communities. You had the Sephardi, the Ashkenazi, and even Sephardi even had two types of Sephardim, but let's just say Sephardi, Ashkenazi, and then you had the Italians, the older Italians there. They had their Nusach is older than Ashkenazi Nusach, and you had this Nusach. So this, and you can read about this, Shadal has his Mavri L'machzeh B'nei Roma is redone, and Shadal talks about this. He gives you the history. He talks a lot about it. It's well worth reading, actually. But the Kamchad Avishuna was a commentary, very nice commentary collection, mainly of Rishonim, and put together by the Rabbi Yechon and Shevis. So he actually didn't write his name in the commentary, but what's interesting to see in the colophon, which is at the end of the sefer, you can see it says Re'inu me'amenu. He says, why did he write this book? Why did he even put this commentary? He says Re'inu me'amenu. Asher me'hem mibli yovinu mashi yispalu Hashem alekeim. I see people of our time, they don't know what they're reading when they pray to God, and this unfortunately still goes on today.
Right.
B'Shabbos on Shabbos and Yom Tov, me'asher dibre beremez hapaitonim u'mechabrim. It was written the Python and the Pia. It was all written in remez. It's not clear. Uberoisham hamara god la kaliri. Anyone knows the kaliri is beautiful. Forget about it. Asher ein of Talmud al Midrashim. He's always looking at the Midrashim. Ubinyone soides hakabala. Dvorim gvoyim v'atikim. Very high, lofty things we don't understand. V'im ki be'eda hakdoisha ansei seichel umadav chachamim koilim. In the knowledgeable individuals. Asher kol roz loy honest lehem. They don't know. The regular people want to know what they're saying. You don't know what you're saying. It's a terrible thing. You get up there, you mumble jumble, you have no idea what you're talking about. Someone that says a tefillah and he prays and he doesn't understand what he's saying. You have to know what you're saying. You have to know you're davening. You need to understand what you're talking about when you get up there and you daven. So he says, I wrote this commentary. He didn't write his name. And he says, we picked someone a chacham to write this, etc. But there are certain editions of this that it says, Zeshem Machaber, Pir Zeh Machzer, Rav Amuvah, Rabbi Yochanan, Yored Tzedek, Rabbi Yosef Ish Trevis, Megal upon him. It says his name. And we also know he has another work, this Rabbi Yochanan Trevis, that he says, I wrote that book. So actually, a couple of years ago, Machon Yishlaim reissued this, said the Kimcha Avishuna with a commentary, but for some reason, and I have no idea. This is baffling, and because this is Kimcha Avishuna, this is the opportunity to say it. They put it out in Nusach Ashkenaz. I can't even understand why somebody would take a book, a row. It was Nusach Raima, and you would put Nusach Ashkenaz. Why would you do that? What kind of a pointless thing? I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense. What I was reading from was the introduction in the Medrash B'Chiddush. It's a beautiful Haggadah, read on Abelazar Nachman Foa, and they have the Nusach B'nei Roima there. They use a proper Nusach, and they took the Pirush Kimcha Avishuna with a beautiful introduction. It's a wonderful sefer. But getting back to this Lot 101 and the Dr. Paul collection, the Kestenbaum 112 auction, you can get the Bologna, printed in Bologna, 1540. You can get this commentary with the commentary Kimcha Avishuna, beautiful title page. It's really a wonderful work. It's really a beautiful commentary, again, based off the Rishonim. So anyone wants to check it out, that is Lot 101.
Too bad that you can't even get the even the Mecharim Shalayim edition. I would have thought maybe they put it in Nusach Ashkenaz because they thought this would be on the shelf of every shul, but it's not. It was printed in a very limited edition, small number printing, and they never reprinted it. And it's almost impossible to find now, which is a shame because, like you said, it's quite a. The Pirush itself is wonderful. The Roima, the Nusach has great historical value, but too bad we can't find it around.
Yeah, very nice, short commentary. He brings you, short little things. He explains to you like Tfilas Mincha. He starts off. He says Tfilas says Mana Mishei Shoy, Samech Solamayla, Adalayla, Divrei Chamin. Explains to you when you have Mincha. Like it's very basic. Walking through a very nice commentary. I think in general, again, we don't want to take us too far afield. There's need for nice commentaries on Chumash again on Tfilah, and so this is really a. Again, check out Lot 101, Kimch Navishuna. Beautiful copy here in this auction. So moving along, some other things here that we wanted to get to as well. Lot 110, Moshe, I know you mentioned before, another Isaac Leeser. This is another Isaac Sefer Divrei Tzadikim. This is the book of daily prayers for every day in the year according to the custom of German Polish Jews. So this is the edited by Isaac Leeser, this German and Polish Jew, sorry. This one is, even though he was in the Chazan, he was from German extraction, and this is the one that he published there. So if you want more Americana, you can see, you can buy this one. There's some other Americana here in this collection, and there are some other Sidurim as well included in this collection. Lot 134 of Avram Port Leon, Shulte Gibarim, a very interesting book that he talks about various different things. It's like encyclopedia on, they say, music, numismatics, weaponry, architecture. He goes, everything that has to do with the Beis HaMikdash. And it's a very unique work. You really have to read this
kind of kind. There's nothing like it.
I don't think there's anything like this book anywhere else. And also I think it's been proven to discuss. Like he made a lot of this stuff was from his own. I don't know if he really had some things he had sources, some things he just decided. And he printed this. I believe this when he went. This book here, this copy, it's printed in Mantua. I think he printed it and he bought it to himself, the press, and they printed it by him. If you look at the title page, Nisfas b'Mantua b'mitzvoisav u'b'beisoi. Tachas ha'mamshelas v'amaylas adenenu haduchis. Vincenzo Gonzaga, the Gonzagas were in Mantua, and he says he brought it there to Mantua. Again, Mantua was, this is early Italy. Sorry, everybody, for the Italy, but come on, I see so many Italian books, I can't resist talking about Italian jewelry. So Italy at the time, right? We didn't say this earlier.
If you're talking about old Svarim, Italy is the cradle of Svarim publication, and a very good collection is gonna be be tied in with a lot of Italian history.
So Mantua is a different country essentially, and so he printed it. He brought the press here. There's a story why he brought it here at his house. So this is Lot 134. Again, fascinating book. Lot 135, more classic Italian, the Psakim of Menachem Rekanati. I think we've discussed this a little bit in the past. There's Lot 138 is a copy of the Sforna's or Amim, Sforna's classical work of philosophy. And by the way, this is always worth telling people that the Sforna wrote this book about philosophy, and then he translated it into Latin, and he dedicated it to the Queen of France. He himself wrote it in Latin. They actually just came out with an academic edition that's got a Hebrew, Latin, and English for anybody who wants to see. It's a very expensive book, an academic book, but the Sforno himself wrote it. So this is the Hebrew edition, Lot 138, for those interested in checking out that. Then there's Lot 140, Shem Tov and Shem Tov, Sefer Emunos. I know, Moshe, we talked about this. You have you've researched this book and the Hasagas on it.
Yeah, it was almost, I think it's almost certain that this was published together with, it has almost the same Sharblat and by the same printers in the same year, that they have a Sefer HaEmunos, which is a critique of philosophy, primarily the Rambam, a critique of Moreh Nevuchim, for the most part. He throws in other philosophers as well, followers of the Rambam usually. But it's a running critique of it's a pretty big Sefer, a running critique of philosophy, and almost exact same format. It was followed by a critique of this Sefer by the Maharam al-Ashkar, which later was included in his Chuvas Kuf Yud Zayin, but originally published separately as a rebuttal of Sefer HaEmunos and a defense of the Rambam. My interest was I had started an edition, and right now it's just it's one of many projects that I wish I had more time for. But
funds, if someone wants to provide funds.
For the right amount of funds, we can make the time. We can create time. We can, But I was the Sefer HaEmunos is only quoted in truncated form by Maram Alashker. So I had to go back to the original. I want to, kind of merge the two and really explore and open up each individual debate. I think it would make a really fascinating Maimonidean work.
Lot 143 is Michal Yoifi. This is the first edition, printed in Constantinople, 1548. First of all, it's very interesting. I keep saying the title page because, again, when you look at these originals, you see these different title pages, variations in the early title pages. Later on, once people get to today's print, it's not interesting, or even later on printing, later century, it's not interesting anymore. But here, so you had the title page. It says Sefer Michal Yoifi in the middle, and then it's basically an hourglass, if you think of it almost. It goes, the lines go down, 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 and they get to one word, and then it opens up again. It starts going the opposite way. It gets bigger, 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 down. So it's a very unique title page. Michal Yoifi he was Moroccan, and this is a kind of, he basically takes a lot of Radak, we talked about earlier, and a lot of other things, and he compiles it onto Chumash, almost like a commentary of the Psukim onto Chumash.
Which you can understand. I mean, because of the great Bikush, like you mentioned, for the Radak. But the Radak is written as a dictionary. It's in alphabetical order. It's not written on the Psukim. You have Radak on Navi, and you have Radak on Bereshis, but that's it. So he was filling in that void and arranging the Radak and others, but primarily the Radak, like you said, arranging it on the Psukim, and then it was followed in. It was printed together with a fill-in commentary of other pirushim, which are not necessarily from the Balei Hadiktuk, but also al derech hapshat, al derech hadiktuk. And again, this is not to belabor the point, but this is another sefer which went through printing after printing, widely sought after by both Jews and Christian Hebraists, and today just unheard of entirely.
Another incunabula, lot 158, is the Torah. This is the Torah 1490s, and it's a second edition. 4 parts bound in 2 volumes. It's missing a few leaves, as it says here. But right now, by the way, it has a bid of $55,000. It's beautiful. You see these early prints. First of all, anyone sees early prints, you see that there's such beautiful fonts. There's such a pleasure to read. Whether if you've held one in your hand, or you've just seen scans, you can see how nice these early prints are. People think of old Sefarim, terrible to read. First of all, those are usually later prints, and those are just because you're seeing facsimiles, copies of a copy of a copy of a copy, some low quality scan of whatever that you can't read it. But these are just really, really wonderful. So that is an incunabula. That's lot 158. Again, there's a couple of other old Torah here. Lot 161 is the Bechinas Olam. We've mentioned B'daya B'dirsi. We've discussed Bechinas Olam. So this is an early edition of Bechinas Olam. This is commentaries of Moshe Chaviv and Yosef Francis. I think we've talked about how this was a super popular work and a super common, and many commentaries written on it. Today doesn't exist anymore. So just unfortunately one of those the way history turned out for some Sfarim, Hakol Toli B'Mazal, and you see it, like right. Some Sfarim just go on, and then they're gone. Lot 166, for those that like history, is the first edition of Sefer Direi Yamim L'Malchei Tzarfas U'Malchei Beis Atom and Atugar, history of the kings of France and the Ottoman Turks. This is a Jewish history of secular history. Joseph HaKohen, this is printed in 1554. And as they say here, the first Hebrew book to use the word America in describing the New World. And this is really a history. This is a history book. Actually, stay tuned. I have a podcast coming about him and about Emek Abacha, which is his taken from here, which is his really depressing, very sad, all the travails and all the bad things that happened to the Jews since the destruction of the Churban HaBayis. Stay tuned in the 3 weeks, Mr. Shem. And so this is Yosef HaKohen. This is if anyone wants history. So this is lot 166. And then we have a couple of other, 167, 168, Yosef ibn Yachya, commentaries on Megillus. And then finally, lot 170 is the Isidore Kaufman portrait of a young boy wearing a frat. And by the way, this is not an art podcast, but it has a bid already of $160,000. So for those interested in art, but otherwise, again, there's no manuscripts or letters or thing like that in this collection. Just really wonderful, beautiful pieces. By the way, some of them are in the few $100 range. They don't start. They don't have massive starting bids. Everything very affordable, really high quality, really nice pieces. I feel very, as Moshe started off, very, this collection was curated, put together. You could see by someone with love out in Newfoundland was putting together this collection of really early, beautiful prints, really nice editions. And so for those interested, there'll be a link in the show's notes to the Kestenbaum Auction 112, Rare Hebrew Books in the Library of the late Dr. Michael D. Paul. Again, Thursday, June 12th, 1 p.m. And so, and regardless, as we often do on these podcasts, urge everyone to check out the catalog. Go online, go on BidSpirit. Just look at it, even if it's not something you'll bid on. Just check it out. It's very nice, well worth seeing this Jewish history, and hopefully we're able to, we learn something every time we do this. Hopefully you learn something from this. And, I want to also thank Kestenbaum for sponsoring this podcast. And, but it's always a pleasure to do these, Moshe, I know. But, for myself, I'm sure for you.
Oh, yeah, we love it. And again, you spend a lot of money and you travel far to go to some kind of museum. Just go through the catalog. It's really spend an afternoon in a museum of Jewish and the bibliographical history, like we mentioned before, Nachi, there's so much Italian history. There's a lot of Jewish history here. But again, these early prints, you're right, Italy is very, very well represented over here. It's a great history lesson. Very enjoyable to go through this. Very enjoyable to spend time with you, Nachi, and your listeners. I hope the listeners enjoyed as well. And I hope everybody has great success with this auction.
Thank you very much for joining me.